Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Gail Carriger, and we are going to be talking about books. Oh my god, shocking. Mostly my books, for a change. I actually do a lot of talking where I recommend other people's books, but today we're going to be talking about my books, suggested reading order, in-world order, chronology order, writing order, the orders of things, the orders of my universes. I'll also be chatting a bit about how I came to invent some of these worlds, how they connect to each other, and that sort of a thing. I am not seeing very many eyeballs at the moment. I think we're on time, but I will say I always do these lives on Facebook, and Facebook has really been tinkering with the background code on, or not updating it. So I'm really not getting, I'm not getting the feedback during these interactions that I would hope from an interaction. So I'm not quite sure exactly what is going on. So just so everybody knows, I'm kind of also monitoring this myself. And yeah. Ooh, 2 people are watching. Hi, 2 people. As usual with one of my lives, it's would be awesome if you would tell me where you're tuning in from. If you feel like it, you don't have to. Because we're talking about my books today, you could tell me which book you started with. I'm always wild to know whether you started with the first book that I ever wrote, or whether you, hi Seattle, I was just in you. I literally just came back from Seattle a couple days ago. No, I wasn't there for author events. I was there for a writing retreat, which was great. Anyway, yeah, tell me where you're tuning in from. Tell me which book you started with, if you'd rather tell me that. It's always crazy to me when somebody like started with Blameless or something. I'm like, you picked up the book, you picked up the series on the 3rd one in the middle, and you still became a fan. Hello, Detroit. So exciting. Started with Solace from the beginning. Right, so that's what we will, yay, I'm so glad Facebook gave you an alert, June. Hi, Ty. Hi, DC. Well, this is awesome glasses. Yay. Okay, that actually starts us off because, ooh, of course, it's over there. Hold on just a second. Pretend you're not seeing this, everybody. I need to get my notebook because I actually wrote a note. I wrote notes. For the first time, I'm actually prepared for one of these lives, and Facebook isn't showing it to anybody. Typical. It's a lovely gray day here, by the way. We thought we were in for spring here in Northern California, and now it's raining again, so I don't know what's going on. But see, I have a list of things to talk about, and the glasses are one of them. So, for everybody who loves my glasses, they do in fact have teeny tiny teapots and teacups all over them. Isn't that amazing? And then the shape. So these are from a company called Pear Eyewear. And because everybody always asks me about them, I did put a link in the description, either down there, or either up there or down there, depending on how you're watching this. So there's a link to Pear Eyewear there. This frame shape is called the Ella, which is basically their cat eye shape. And then these are a tea time frame that they had for a while. They offer new frame styles all the time. Basically, you can change them out. So you can just put different colors or different patterns or whatever you like on them. So I have other frames that are books, and then I have different colorful frames. It's made it a lot easier for me to match my frames to my various outfits. But today it was cold and I'm just wearing a sort of a boring outfit, so I thought I would dress it up with some fancy pants frames. So those are the glasses. This from Amazon. This is from Poshmark, which is like a reseller site. It's a little cashmere sweater. I changed out the buttons. I put these sort of steampunk buttons on it. And then this is like a little blousey thing that I got when I was in Thailand, actually, believe it or not, from a thrift store. So that's me and what I'm wearing. Oh, lipstick. I'm wearing a lipstick. Here it is. Believe it or not, it's just a plain old bullet lipstick, and it's just Wet n Wild. And it is number 539A. It is a sort of a pinky red. It's a little pinky for me. I prefer a bluer red. But I've been thinking about trotting down to try Merit's new satin in the bullet. I decided I just wanted a bullet occasionally for days where I was just going to wear it for a little while and then wipe it off again. So normally I don't wear bullet lipsticks because I wear color stays. But this has been not book talk with Gail Carriger. The last thing that is not book related before we get on to book related is our little teapot cat. I always have to have a little teacup chat at the beginning of my lives. I'm not having tea today because I already had it, and I'm good for now. I'm a little, you can tell by how fast I'm talking that I've had a little too much caffeine already today. But I thought I would talk about one of my favorite teacups. So the cool thing about this teacup, for me, from a like ceramicist perspective, is how delicate its little foot is, this tiny little delicate foot. To me, this style of teacup looks very kind of Egyptian or Arabic, but actually this is Chinese. And I think it's from maybe the 60s. It's not a particularly old one, but it is very, very thin and very, very delicate. And I kind of just really love the color scheme, and I love the like incredibly minute detail of the work with this teacup. So it's been in my collection for a really long time. So I thought I would share that one today. It also has a kind of a slightly deco feel to it with the symmetry. Anyway, that's our teacup chat. So, and there's always chaos. There's always chaos, everybody. So as per usual, I will take questions in a little bit. When you do ask a question, please remember to put a question mark at the beginning. That way I know it's a question. If you're watching this later on YouTube, you can also still ask a question. I do monitor my YouTube comments, so I will come back and answer you if you ask a question there. And then, or at any point in the future, I had somebody go through some of my old videos on YouTube recently from like years ago and ask me some questions, and I was like, there it is. So today we're going to be talking about book chronology and book reading order, and I've talked about this kind of thing before, but like not in particular detail in terms of like the world building and stuff like that. So I thought that might interest you today. Also, you voted on it in the Parasol Protectorate group, so here I am. Just so you know, for future reference, if you see me in person, I have these bookmarks. You have to either get a book from me or win a book from me on my newsletter, or you can download this in digital format. Again, the link is the Parasol Protectorate book reading order, and you can get a download digitally. But if you want this specific bookmark, you have to see me in person. It's always gonna be the latest release at the top. So currently it's these guys, and then on the back is every book I've ever written. That's the reason it's the latest release, because that allows me to update the list. Right? Makes sense. And it's basically a tiny checklist of all of my books. So yeah, come and see me in person, and I'll give you one of these. So that's kind of what I'm going off of. But I mixed it up a little so I could talk about the short stories and some of the things that I don't talk about as often, not just the print books. So here we go. In terms of reading order, I'm going to talk about how I would envision reading these now, having written them all. However, I can't really talk to the experience of reading them because I wrote them. So it's kind of up to you guys to decide in the great debate whether my book should be written in the order I wrote them, or whether they should be read, my book should be read in the order that I wrote them, or whether the book should be read in the order that they chronologically exist in the universe, the Parasol verse and the San Andreas Shifter verse and the Tinker Stars verse, or whether they should be read in some other sort of order in terms of, say, protagonist ages and your reading age. So you want to start with the YA stuff, nothing like that. So it's kind of, people entered at different points in time. People started reading me when I had different sets of books out. So yeah, the debate is vibrant and always open to your thoughts. But I will talk about how I would envision reading them. So what I would start with is actually not a book. I would start with, I know, isn't this exciting? I would start with a short story. So I have thought about printing out my short stories as little kind of micro collectibles, but it turns out that's like prohibitively expensive and a weird like gap in the market. It's just really hard to get like a little tiny pamphlet book printed, basically. So The Curious Case is Alessandro's story. And it is basically a little bit of background of his characterization. Alexandro Terabati is Alexia Terabati's father. And as it turns out, as you read her series, the sins of the father actually play into that series and whether they are sins or not, it plays into that series. So having a little background information on him will help you understand it. Now, I wrote this after I had finished the Parasol Protectorate series because people kept asking me about him, and so I wanted to give some background context. People really like Alessandro Terabati. He's a little bit of an anti-hero. He's a very morally gray character, and I would, before you ask, like to write more of him. I have some of his journal entries because I wrote them as I was writing about Alexia, so I could do some epistolary stuff with him. And then I've also thought about writing like other incidentals through the course of his life. The reason I haven't really picked him up as a main character to explore a lot is because he has a tragic end. As you know, I'm not spoiling anything, but honestly, spoilers all around, everybody. My books very much interweave with each other. And I'm not an author who writes tragic heroes. And I'm not really an author who writes anti-heroes. I don't really delve into that kind of darkness. It's not part of my DNA. Partly because I don't enjoy dwelling in a character's head like that for very long. So if they're sort of a negative, dark, depressing character, I don't want to live with them for the length of time it takes to write a book, which is 6 months to a year. So yeah, so that's what we start with, Curious Case. Right. Then actually is the Etiquette and Espionage series. So you might save Curious Case for before the Alexia books because he does not really play into these books, but chronologically this is the first thing. It takes place in the 1840s in Egypt. So the next series is the full Etiquette and Espionage series. So when people ask me about like the onboarding for my universe, I tend to say it's the Finishing School series that onboards to the universe because it's written for a younger audience and chronologically it comes before the Parasol Protectorate series. Now, most of you probably started with Solus, but I tend to recommend starting with the Etiquette, Espionage, and the Finishing School series first. So there are 4 books in this series. Why are there 4 books? That's because that's how I pitched it. I pitched it as a quad. And I did that because I was raised on Tamara Pearson. She often writes 4-book series. So it just, for a YA series, it felt more clean to me to do a 4-booker. And that's, I guess, just the way I think in terms of structure for YA, I guess. Not that I tend to write 4-act structure, but it just felt correct. 4 years for a YA series feels correct because, 4 years for high school, 4 years for college, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a 4-book series. So that's next. Okay, what comes after the Finishing School books? Well, this one, actually, Poison or Protect. So Poison or Protect is Precia's book. Precia's a minor character from this series. She's actually one of the mean girls. So this was me having fun, messing with your minds, and redeeming an evil character, which you'll find I like to do a lot of. So yes, this was my first foray into self-publishing novella length, or so longer book. This was my first test at writing more of a romance forward thread. I would call this a romance, although it does have some adventure and silliness and comedy and my usual thing. It's about a house party, and she is, of course, a spy sent to infiltrate the house party. And yeah, I'm very proud of this one. I like it a lot. I think it's fun. And so this is what I would say you read after the Etiquette and Espionage series, but it is lean adult. So if you're younger, you maybe don't want to move directly onto this one. That's what I would read next. And then this one, which is a more recent book. This is a full length, it's not novella length. And this is Dimity's book. Dimity is the best friend character from this series, and I kind of wanted to follow her and see where she ended up. So that's the one I would recommend after that. This is my ode to Cold Comfort Farm, if anybody out there knows that rather obscure reference. But Dimity is basically sent in as a fixer to a vampire hive that is descending into madness. She has to figure out how to heal that hive. So it's also one of my few vampire-centered books. I don't often write vampires. I usually write werewolves. So what comes after that? After that comes Meet Cute. Right. Now, Meet Cute is a contentious one, actually. So this is a short story that actually describes the moment where Alexia and Connell, who are the main couple from this series, met. Now, I actually wrote Soulless intentionally without showing their meet cute because it is a conceit of the romance genre, and I was playing with romance genre. I was sort of parodying romance tropes with this book. So I have an alpha werewolf, but he doesn't behave like an alpha werewolf kind of thing, right? So I have a romance, but there's no meet cute. The meet cute occurs off page. So throughout this book, the two main characters have already met. And the incident that they've already met at is just referred to as the hedgehog incident. And you don't know, as you read all 4 or 5 of these books, what happened in that hedgehog incident. And I had, quite frankly, intended to keep you guys in mystery forever about the hedgehog incident. And then, after I finished the series without telling you the hedgehog incident, I got so many letters from you saying, wait, what happened with the hedgehog? That I wrote Meet Cute. So Meet Cute is technically the little baby prequel to this one. It's just a little short story about how Alexia and Connell met at a garden party, and yes, there's a hedgehog involved. There's also some very interesting, possibly familiar faces turning up in that one. So just, you know, me and my cross-genre and cross-book pollination policies. Yes, so you'll see familiar faces in Meet Cute. So Meet Cute, now where can you get Meet Cute? I think you can get Meet Cute pretty much anywhere, including directly from me. So yeah, I don't think Meet Cute has yet been in print. Maybe it has. Oh yes, Meet Cute is in print in the Subterranean Special Edition called Fan Service. So it is in print, it's just only in a collector's edition so far. Next up is the Soulless series, or the Parasol Protectorate series. So this is the one most people know. This is the one I'm best known for in general, although I would say the Finishing School series is pretty high up there. And this is the first book that I had published. It's not the first book I wrote. Like many, many authors, I have lots of other books out there, but it is the first book that was published by a traditional publisher. So Soulless is next. There are 5 books in the Soulless series, and I would say you read them all back to back at this juncture if you're following my reading plan. So lucky you get to go from one book to the next. There are many super fans out there who will be very unhappy that you get to go from one book to the next, because they all remember when they ended with Changeless and had to wait while I was publishing Blameless on a cliffhanger, because Changeless does in fact have a cliffhanger. You've been warned. Don't worry. Blameless picks right back up and it'll all be okay in the end. That's my promise in all of my books. It'll all be okay in the end. It's the Parasol Protectorate series. Then, after the Parasol Protectorate series, this one, Romancing the Inventor. This is Madame LeFou's book. Madame LeFou is a character introduced in Changeless, the second book in the Parasol Protectorate, and she got her own book, and that would be the one I recommend picking up and reading right after the end of this series. So, that's next. After that comes this one, and here's where things get a little complicated, and I promise I didn't intend that to be this complicated, but it is. This is the spin-off series, the Custard Protocol series. It stars this series' next generation, so it's a generation after those books. And there are 4 books in this series. However, I would say read the first 2, which are both the main character as Prudence in both of these books. So read those 2. And then read Romancing the Werewolf in the middle of the series. That's because it takes place there, and it kind of fits there, and you'll probably want to know what happened to these 2 characters. So these are 2 characters from the... what's the word I'm looking for? These are 2 characters from the Parasol Protectorate series, and they're the only 2 characters that I didn't manage to give them their happy ending in that series, so I had to write a pickup book for that. That's what this is. So this is also a Christmas or, holiday romance. It's not really Christmas, but it is a winter romance, so it's seasonal. But yeah, so that one kind of goes in the middle of the Custard Protocol quad. It's just the way it is. After which you get Competence and Reticence. These are the twins. So again, this is the next generation from the Parasol Protectorate series. There's a set of twins born in the Parasol Protectorate series, and each one of those gets their own book. And then you would be finishing the Custard Protocol series with Reticence. I actually consider myself really good at endings, and I love writing endings, and that includes the ends of individual books, but also the ends of series, like the final book in a series. So I actually think, and Reticent was written not just as a final book in the series, but kind of as a final book in all of the Parasolverse. Not to say I wasn't going to write more in the Parasolverse, but this one really wraps everything up. So there are characters from pretty much every book I've already mentioned, which is why they exist before this one. Now, you don't have to have read everything to understand what's going on, but part of the point of this book is specifically for you. It's specifically a fan service book. So you do get look-ins on pretty much all of your favorite characters. Everybody from all the different books, including these novella books like this one, has a look-in this book. So yeah, it's just, it's a kind of a wrap-up book. There's a big wedding sequence scene, which kind of is where you get all of this attention to side characters. So you get a little check-in with your favorite characters, I hope. I think I covered everybody. But that's why it falls where it falls when I'm talking about reading order. I think to really love this book, you have to have had at least, the majority of the previous books in the series. So that's Reticence. Then you would read this one, How to Marry a Werewolf. Now, technically, if you're dying to know what happened to Channing at the end of the Parasol Protectorate series, you could jump and read this one. This one very much stands alone. But it does presuppose that this book has already occurred. So so incidents in this book have already happened in this book. So you'd be a little confused by the pack dynamics of the London pack if you hadn't read Romancing the Werewolf before this one. So, and this one's Channing's book. Channing is another somewhat irredeemable character from the Parasolverse who I wanted to redeem from the Parasol Protectorate series, and so I gave him his redemption arc in this book. This is actually, of my novellas, I think probably the most popular. People really love this book. It is intended to be the beginning of another little mini-series of werewolf kind of romances. And so there will be more coming in this one, I promise. When I write the next Parasolverse book, which I haven't quite decided yet, but it will be in this one. So it'll be something that follows this book. So that's How to Marry. And then at the very end, I would recommend reading this one. Now, if you're in love with the Delightfully Deadly series of spies, you can just read them in order if that's what you want to do. The Delightfully Deadly series basically follows the finishing school girls all grown up. So this is Agatha's book. Agatha is another bestie friend to Sophronia, the main character of the Finishing School books, and this is her book. The reason I recommend reading it last is because this is a long time frame book. So this book actually covers, starting with events in well, it doesn't start that way, but the breadth of its coverage in terms of timeline is from the Finishing School series all the way up to the end of the Custard Protocol series. So this one covers basically all the territory temporally that all of those previously books have. So there'll be little tiny references to what's going on in those other books. Again, you don't have to have read all the books to understand what happens in this series. That's not the point of this story, but it's kind of fun if you have, because I'm having fun with you and like dropping little Easter eggs and stuff like that. This is also probably the saddest book, and I think in part, again, I never put anything to bed forever, but there was a part of me that was like kind of wrestling with putting the Parasolverse to sleep in terms of long series set in that universe. And so this is kind of this book. So there's a melancholy to this book that's not common in my work. I still think it has its funny bits. It's full of fun characters, and of course it does end up all okay in the end. But I also wanted to grapple with mature characters who have made interesting and different life choices in terms of what they want for partnership and romance and friendship, and how you cope with those choices at the end of a long life and coming back around to romance in your 50s and 60s. So in other words, I wanted to write a romance that was for grown-ups, very much grown-ups. And so you'll find in a lot of my work and in a lot of my romances in particular, I'm like unpacking and thinking about very common romance tropes, like most romance books are for and about characters in their 20s and 30s. And so I wanted to write a romance book that's essentially about a character who's in her late 50s and early 60s. So that's all this one, and that's why I kind of recommend it last. And it's probably the most like thoughtful of my books in that regard. It's a personal favorite of mine because it was a lot of emotional legwork to work out myself. But that's why I tend to recommend people read this one at the end. But you know what? Again, this is just a recommendation. Like I said, you all have had different approaches to my books and have different thoughts on what's the best order to read them in, right? So that's kind of up to you. And then finally, there's Dear Lord A. Now, Dear Lord Akeldama and the Parasolverse Ephemera is just a collection of essays, deleted scenes, and a long-running advice column that is the good vampire giving terrible advice to you when you have asked him questions. And so it's kind of just a companion piece. It's only available in digital right now, and it's just fun, and you can only get it via my newsletter. So yeah, I mean, you can kind of get it off of the website, but you get a discount if you get it via my newsletter. And yeah, so it's not really a story, it's just a bunch of like extra bits. If you've made it through all of my universe, 30 odd books or however many there are now, it's just a fun little perk if you don't want to leave those characters behind, particularly the good vampire. Right, so after that, what happens in the scope of my universe is something called the supersaturation event. And because this is video and not typing, I can just talk about this. Essentially, a supersaturation event occurs, and of course, we all know who's involved with that. And that causes a restructure on the way ether and what turns into quintessence works, and the way that magic and shapeshifting creatures work under the scope of that universe. And that is because my background is in technological innovation and change and archaeological records, and so I'm very interested in what happens when there's like disasters, like major disasters, in this case a global disaster with my invented magical system. And the end result is a reboot and possible mass extinction event. We don't know. I'm not very specific about it, and that's intentional. And the end result is a new state of existence. And I then, as a writer, jump you many years into the future to the current day. So in other words, I am exploring what the Parasolverse would have become in modern day. And that's these books. The San Andreas Shifter books. Now, these are way sexier and and romances. Like, they're strictly romances. They're urban fantasy romances or paranormal romances. But they are lots of fun. Like, I had to reread some of them recently because I'm working on the next one in this series right now, and I forgot how funny they are. They're super sarcastic. They're very blue, so if you don't like swear words, they're probably not going to work for you. I just let myself go. I have a terrible potty mouth, so I just let myself have a grand old time with these books. They're very silly. They're lots of fun. And there are currently 3 in the series. So, and I'm working on the 4th one right now. Don't ask me when it's happening. I don't know yet. But so those are the ones that come next. If you're still reading me, if you're still on this one, and then right now the latest release in that series is actually a newsletter exclusive. It's called Vixen Ecology. It is a darker piece, and it was written during COVID. It's just a short story, and you can only get it via the newsletter. It's like $1.99 or something, but you have to belong to the newsletter to get this one. I originally wrote it for charity to raise money, again, during lockdown and stuff. So yeah, and I still give a portion of the income I get from my direct sales to those charities. So it kind of still, as far as in my brain, it kind of still counts as a charitable thing, but I just give a portion, and that's easier for me to calculate in the long run. But that's Vixen Ecology. So yeah, you can read that one via the newsletter. And then we skip again. Now, I'm not entirely sure in my own brain whether the Tinkered Stars is the natural evolution of the Parasolverse or not. In a certain way it is, because of the way I think and the way I construct universes. It's very similar throughout my pantheon, I guess I would say. But the next skip ahead is the sci-fi stuff. Now, I don't necessarily have a reading order that I have to recommend for the sci-fi stuff, but generally speaking, if you've been reading this series and you're moving on to my sci-fi stuff, then it's this book next. This is one of my favorite books I've ever written. It's incredibly fun. It's about culture misunderstanding and culture conflict, which is one of my favorite things to explore as a writer and as a reader. It's like one of my favorite tropes of all time. How do people communicate with each other when you have completely different backgrounds, basically? How do you become friends? How do you move? How do you exist in exile? What's it like to be an alien in another culture or another world or another planet? So this is Triss's story. Triss is an alien ambassador from a very strange race that not a lot is known about, until that strange race shows up on a spaceship and they have a murder on board, and they don't know what to do because they don't have murder in their culture, and so they need to figure out how this person died. And Triss helps out the investigation and falls in love with the security officer in charge of the case. So that's what this one is about. It's so much fun. It starts out with a cat running through a hawker center and dealing with zero gravity, which is hilarious, as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah. And then I would go to Crudrat. Now, for those of you who are obsessed with reading me in the order I've written things, Crudrat was actually the third book I wrote while I was being published. So it was, the 10th or 11th or 12th book I've actually written, but it came, I wrote Soulless and then Changeless, and then I actually wrote Crudrat. And then I wrote Blameless. I remember I wrote Blameless and then Crudrat, but it was in the middle of the Parasolverse, any way you look at it. But I actually would put it here. I would put it after. It is a bit of a siege change shift because this is definitely YA. It has a very strong young adult voice. But again, it's much beloved. It is about a girl escaping evil space station, basically, where she's been being used for what essentially amounts to child labor. And I actually wrote it after I'd read a really interesting piece on the child workers in the cotton mills in northern England. So that's one of its seeds originally. It does have a second book called Countervail, which I will eventually write, I promise. I have all the notes for it. I just need to clear time in my schedule to write it. And to be totally frank with you, my science fiction doesn't sell as well as my historical stuff. So it kind of, unless the muse is burning me to write sci-fi, sci-fi kind of has to take the back burner just because of the way you guys consume what I write. So there is going to be a second one in the series. It will be a duology. There will only be the two, but I haven't gotten around to writing it yet, and I'm sorry, but I will. I promise. I have the notes for it. You know I write my things eventually, right? I finish series. I'm not one of those authors. I will write it. I do write regularly. I do write 2 or 3 books a year, so it'll happen. And then finally we have this series. So there are 3 books. They are all written. It has a very satisfying ending, I think. In this one. This one. So, yeah. And that brings us out. My goodness, I've written a lot of stuff, haven't I? Should I apologize? Have I written too much? That is always the question. But yeah, that's the order I would say to read them in the either comments below or title and comments above from me, the header stuff. I have links to blog posts where I talk about the chronological order. So the way the books exist in the universe, which is pretty similar to how I just recommended the reading order. Then I have a link to the blog post that has reading order, and then I have a link to the blog post or the post that has publication order. If you're a true dyed-in-the-wool, what you're really interested in is how my writing style changes and evolves, which it does. That's another thing that happens when you're an author. Yeah, there it is. Someone's saying that the Dome 6 ending tore my heart out. And I'm like, I hope it was good. I hope that was a good tearing of the heart, a rendering of the soul asunder. There it is. Now, I'm happy to take some questions, and whether you want to talk more about the reading order or whether you just have other questions about the universe, coming up with the universe, or you know me, if you just have a question about something random, I'm happy to answer that too. Don't mind. We're a small group today, so I hope we get some questions. Usually you're curious about things. Remember to please put the question mark at the beginning. And yeah, okay, I'm going to take a look and see if I have any questions already. Uh-oh. Keep writing. Keep writing. No, write more. Thank you all so much. There's a request for a cookbook. So I did have a brief-lived and beloved, by me at least, a blog. It was organized with somebody else. Excuse me, well, it's warm. It's suddenly warm in here. I had this blog with someone else who was doing the testing the recipes and writing the recipes and stuff like that. And she sort of disappeared. And so that kind of put me off a cookbook because we had arranged to do a blog that would eventually become a cookbook. And she just sort of vanished into the ether. And I was like, well. Also, for those of you who've ever read any of my recipes, you know that I'm a terrible, like, Victorian cook. I'm like a total cupboard household cook, where I'm just like, people want portions and like cooking times and heat, and I'm just like, yeah, you just throw a handful in, you cook it until it smells like it's done. You know, I'm just terrible. I make terrible recipes. I do enjoy it, but I'm really bad at it. So I don't think I'm the right person to write a cookbook. I'm going back through while you guys collect some questions for me. Here we go. LaShonda has a question. Will Lady K eventually have a book? I know it crosses a lot like Aggie's book. Who's Lady K? Lady K? Have I forgotten one of my own characters? This is the other thing about writing so many characters. Also, I'm very brain dead right now, everybody, because I've been dealing with a family crisis, and so my brain is like not working. So please excuse me and remind me who Lady K is. Yeah. I don't know who you're talking about, Sean. I'm sorry. This is a tip for all you authors out there, or soon-to-be authors out there. Keeping track of a full scope universe like I've written is it's too much for one brain, really. It's why I have beta readers. Quite frankly, I have some lovely beta readers and you know, secret super team helpers culled from your ranks who help me keep track of everything, because my brain I'm old. I'm getting old and forgetful. S.H. Klein asks, will my trip to Thailand be featured in any upcoming books? You know, since I intend to go back again in the not too distant future, I think Thailand is going to have to feature at some point, in some way, in some of my books. Otherwise, how can I tax deduct it? Or at least a tax deduct part of it. Yeah. No, Thailand has certainly crept in. For example, quite a few of the names and words and a lot of the development of the different languages and linguistics came from studying the Thai language in particular. It is an awesome language. It's super fascinating. It's extremely different from anything else I've ever studied. So that definitely, it's already had an impact on my writing and creation of different cultures, partly because the language is so unique, and it kind of retrained the way my brain thought about things, like registers, honorifics, polite particles, and that sort of stuff. And so that impacted how I conceived of how galactic common would work in the future, especially if you assume, as I did, that as humans expand into space, there's a more like linguistic mashup of all of the current languages into a new evolved language, which would be probably predominantly dominated by both English and Mandarin, and possibly, you know, some of the Southeast Asian languages as well. Languages that all have sort of registers and honorifics and things in them, and shifting pronouns and stuff. And so I wanted to make sure that a future language of humanity, such as it is in the far future of my books, involved a lot of linguistic concepts like that. And so studying Thai kind of opened my eyes, not just to those, but just to some of the even more unusual ones. So because for those of you who don't know, I studied the language before I went there, because I think it's really, I try to be polite when I travel to a foreign country and be able to say at least please and thank you and how do you do and hello and like, you know, and Thai's hard. It has 5 tonal registers, so it's not an easy language, especially if you're an English speaker, and that's the only languages I have are Latin-based languages, and so I'm not used to tones, and I'm not good at them, everybody. I'm really not good at them. I'm okay as a mimic, but it's really hard to learn tonality if you haven't been raised with it. Oh, goodness gracious me. All right, so I think those are the questions from the past in the thread. If I've missed your question from the past while I was talking about the reading order, go ahead and ask the question again, please. And meanwhile, I'll look at what's been chattered in the future. Robin's here, which means we get questions. Great, how exciting. Okay. Lady K, everybody has questions about Lady K. Good, it's not just me. I see Jessie has a question. I'm just scrolling to make sure I get everyone's questions. Writers can never write too much. Okay, I think that's where we were. All right. Lavender asks, as someone who debuted in mass market paperback, ooh, we're getting a nitty gritty question here right out the back, of course, from Lavender. Wonderful. How do I think the market is different now? Okay. For those of you who don't know or weren't here at the very, very beginning, Soulless, this book here, this is trade paperback size, but it actually debuted as a mass market paperback, and it was $8.99 when it hit the market. That was in 2009. So that was the very, very early days of digital. Borders was still around, just to give you some historical context. I think part of Soulless's success was the fact that it was printed in mass market. I think at the time, this cover was very unusual and very weird. Steampunk was pretty unknown. And so the fact that it was mass market and cheap as a result meant that a lot more people were more likely to take a chance on it than they would have been had it been the standard of the industry, which was and is still often, unfortunately, to produce a debut book in hardcover at $30 a pop. So I think people took a chance on a $9 book when they wouldn't if it had been $30. And I don't know if I had an impact because I was a baby debut author at the time, but I did beg for that. I physically begged them to produce Soulless in mass market because of this, because I knew it was a weird genre mashup book. I wasn't sure anybody was going to take it, and if they did, it would be taking a risk, so it would be a lot better for a print edition to be cheap. So that's intentional. And incidentally, if you have one of those mass markets, hold on to it because they're totally out of print now and people covet them because they're the first editions basically. So yeah, so this whole series came out in mass market, and then it had a mass market box set as well, which is very clutch because I think they only printed like a couple thousand of the box set, with the proper box that they all fit in and everything. So if you got one of those, you are sitting pretty. Anyway, so it's changed completely since then. Like, everything has changed in the publishing industry since then. I mean, in some ways, it's the same as it ever was in terms of how difficult it is to get a traditional contract, how bad those contracts are for authors. If you're an author who's trying to come out with a traditional publisher right now, I would recommend listening to a podcast called the Publishing Rodeo podcast, or the Publishing Rodeo, I think is what it's called, which is by 2 authors who debuted in 2022, talking about what it was like for them. And I listened to it because I want to know what it's like for newer authors, because I like to stay in touch with what's going on in the industry. And I was a little startled by how much is different and how much has stayed the same, but they have much more relevant information. If what you want listening to me now is to be published in the traditional publishing world, listen to that podcast. Don't listen to me, because it has all changed. To answer your question as shortly as possible, Lavender, the market's completely different now because there is only one major bookstore, and that's Barnes & Noble. And then there's some indie bookstores, and they're somewhat doing well. But they only really stock traditionally published works. It's hard for them to get them to stock indie stuff. And they're mostly struggling because the business model is based off of a sort of a few heavy hitter bestsellers and not a lot else, which is not dissimilar from when I came out. But I think it was easier for somebody like me with a really weird book that had no comparative titles to make it. And I think it would be much, much harder for Soulless to make it now. So that has changed. Mass market has faded out. For those of you who are lovers of the mass market size of book, like myself, there are very few mass markets being produced anymore. They are still published, but it's rare. Mostly the industry has entirely moved to trade paperback size. And that's for various reasons, including it's more global, the size is. There's just more books like of this size outside of the United States. In the UK, it's called B4 format. So that's part of the reason. It's just becoming a little bit more standardized. The size is, and mass market's fading away. Also, the predominant assumption is that the mass market reader base is mostly transitioned to digital because the same immediacy and cheapness factor is being satisfied by digital. I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but that's kind of one of the assumptions. So yeah, mass market is dying out. None of my books since the Parasol Protectorate series came out in mass market. After that, the Finishing School series came out in hardback and then trade, and the Custard Protocol books were the same. And then everything I do myself as a publisher, so all of these guys are trade as well. And I specifically pick the size I pick so they're about the same size as the trades that were produced by my publisher, because I want them to be about the same size on the shelf. It's not always exactly the same size because some publishers are metric and some are not. And there's sometimes like a 2 millimeter difference. I'm sorry, I'm a little OCD myself. I wish I could match them up more perfectly, but yeah, I do what's called 8 by 5 or 8 inches by 5 inches for my own stuff. And in terms of the market, I mean, I now as a writer have lived through the digital revolution in ebooks. I myself am mostly a digital reader, which is not to slam hardbacks. I think what's happened and what's happening is kind of what I'm trying to do myself, which is I tend to bring out my books in trade paperback and digital as close to the same time as possible, and then audio as soon as I can after that. Audio always takes more time. And then what I like to do whenever possible is to do a luxury version in hardcover. So when I do hardcover, I try to make it collectible for you, for super fans, and for readers who really like the physical book as art. And so I also try to make the print hardcovers really beautiful and different. So they tend to have slightly different content, so they have extra content in them. And then they also have, they're extra special in some way. And then I do a limited run. And that really is limited. So you have to be a member of my newsletter to get the information when I have one of these special editions. And there's usually, I think I've maxed out at maybe 1,000 is the most I've ever done on a special edition. Yeah, and that's just because, booking a run like that is you have to tell them exactly how many you want to print. And also part of the appeal is that it's rare. There's only a few of them. And then I just try to make them really nice and special so that, because I'm assuming if you want a book like that, it's because you like the book as an art piece. That's one thing that has changed for me is I've changed the way I look at books and book production. And I think the world is slowly following kind of in that regard. Not that I'm a trendsetter, but I think that's kind of where the publishing industry is going. Lavender, that was a very long answer to your question. Katie says, my students want to know if you write with intentional theme or literary elements. So this is theme in the traditional Lake Crit sense of the word theme. And then literary elements I would assume are also things like narrative choices, like beats, like Kitsuru Tenketsu or 3-act or 5-act structure, and then messaging. And the answer is most of the time, sure. I would say, like most commercial genre fiction authors, I have themes and trends and feelings that I'm constantly unpacking. And those of you who have read quite a few of my books probably can name them along with me, but found family, making sure queer and ostracized and outsider characters get people, get love, get affection, whether that is romantic or otherwise, get some kind of connection. So all of my books usually start with characters that are relatively isolated, and then the arc of the narrative is bringing them into a core group of other humans. I think that that's kind of my own personal narrative. It's just something that's really important for me. It's also super important for me to write and see characters that aren't recognized getting that. I don't know how else to put it. So, you know, when I was first writing, we didn't have a lot of queer characters, for example. So I always try to include queer characters in my books so that I can see them get happy endings. Disenfranchised characters in general. And I also intentionally write very light and very kind of rom-com-y books because I feel like Own Voices have handled the unpacking of the more challenging narratives, and there are plenty of books out there that explore the challenges of existing in this world or an alternate world, that grappling with things like cultural conflict and disenfranchisement, homophobia, you know, racial issues, all those sorts of things. I feel like there are lots of books that already do that, and there are lots of commercial genre fiction books that do that. There are lots of great fantasy books and sci-fi and stuff like that, and I will talk about them and call them out and call your attention to them when I encounter them, but that's not what I write. And I want to see those kinds of characters that normally get deep, dark, gritty, necessary narratives also get my kind of narrative. So also get lightweight, fun, happy, romantic, silly, sparkly, magical, fuzzy narratives. Also, like, it's okay for your trans character to not have to constantly confront being in transition or having transitioned. It's okay to have those characters just get a fantastic romance and a happy ending and a little plot of their own, right? That I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So I would say that is one of my core things. Is that a theme in terms of the literary theminess? Probably not. It's more, I guess, an objective or an idol in my brain. Idol in the sense of an idyllic world. So yeah, what else do I have? And then there are other things. So, you know, like culture conflict is often there, like miscommunication, not as a narrative driver, but just in terms of a misunderstanding of personalities or languages or backgrounds. That's something I often explore. I often explore negativity in my books, or the enemy in my books is often obsession. I've talked about this before, but I'm always very nervous of anybody getting too obsessed with anything on any part of the spectrum. So, for example, in the Soulless books, I explore both religious obsession and scientific obsession. So obsession is something... So I guess you could say one of the things that I explore, and this particularly happened recently with the Divinity books, is the gray spaces in which we exist and the moral quandaries that we grapple with, for which there is no easy answer. There may be a funny answer because I'm writing it, but there's no easy answers. And how, if you know my characters and if I've written my characters well, I can give them a satisfying ending while still keeping it a little gray. So there is no like black and white, right or wrong. This is one of the reasons in my books I often have like natural disasters and coping with that kind of thing as the enemy as well, because yeah, and I often redeem characters you may think of as evil. I'll often redeem them in later books by giving them good reason for their behaviors, because all of my characters try to be quite well rounded, so you know, nobody's purely good or purely evil. So I guess the exploration of gray space and gray morality is also pretty common in my books for somebody who writes silly little parodies. Jesse asks, if you could pick another animal, shifter, to be a female lead, much like the were-lioness, what animal would it be? And why? Well, the answer to that question is a little bit like who I would be as a shifter if I got to pick. And the answer is it's in the Dratzi dilemma, right? So, I mean, I was cagey with this when I was writing the last, the Enforcer Enigma, the last San Andreas book. But the next book in this series, the main character is a Dratzi, which is an otter shifter. And I am a water person. I love the water more than anything. So the short answer is, an otter. An otter is what I would write, and it's what I am writing. He's not female, but yeah. I like trickster characters a lot, and I haven't really explored very many trickster characters. I mean, Sophronia maybe qualifies as a trickster character, but yeah, I think otter would be fun. I would love to be an otter pretty much more than they just seem like they're having such a good time. It's such a wonderful little creature. You get river otters and sea otters. I would like to be an otter. Thank you very much. So I would probably like to write that as a shifter female main character. If I wasn't going to do it again into the context of, I mean, I think Kitsune would be really fun, fox shifter character. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it seriously. Well, yeah, I have a female werewolf character that I'd like to explore. I think a female bear shifter would be interesting. So there's quite a few. The San Andreas universe in particular has so many. There's a lot of the mer people coming up in the next book, and let me just tell you, mermaids are complicated in my world anyway. And it would be really interesting to write a mermaid main character as well, but only because of the way I've set up their social structure in my universe. And you don't know that yet, but it's coming. So yeah, they're complicated. So that's kind of a gray area character that might be fun to write. Oh, so Katie's question about Lady K, going back to the earlier part of the live, or maybe it wasn't Katie's question. It was somebody's question about Lady K was Lady Kingair. So Sidhe. Got it. Or Sidhe, or however you want to pronounce her name. It's up to you, your readers. Pronounce it however you want to pronounce it. So this is the inevitable question about whether a Delightfully Deadly book would feature Sidhe. And the question is, I don't know. I could. The problem with the Sidhe book is she's one of those characters like who shows up throughout all of my series, which means in order to construct her narrative, I would need to reread all of the books. And I don't like rereading my own books. So there's that. But I wouldn't rule it off the table. It would be fun to explore her as a werewolf, as a female werewolf leader. Speaking of female shifter main characters, Sidhe would be a very good female shifter main character. So she's definitely on the docket as a possibility, but the buy-ins are really high for yours truly. Ty's like, let the record show Ty did not ask a Sidhe question. To guys from the group, are there vampires in the San Andreas books, or what happened to them? The supersaturation, the ultimate supersaturation question. You all hate it when I give this answer, but I'm gonna give it, and the answer is, there are vampires in the San Andreas series if I need there to be vampires in the San Andreas series. So currently, they're existing in the gray space. You are welcome to imagine that they all moved to the Antarctic or something. Or possibly Northern Europe where it's dark all the time and they have more waking hours. You are welcome to think that supersaturation killed all of the vampires, or at least rendered them infertile. I don't care. But the answer is, so far as the series is concerned, that if I need vampires, they will exist, and if I don't need vampires, they're not around yet. But they will have changed in some way, much like werewolves have changed in their restrictions on shifting and stuff like that in this series because of the way the world got restructured after supersaturation. Vampires also would be changed in some significant way. I just haven't decided how, because I don't need them yet. And if I need them, I'll write them. And if I don't, I won't. There it is. It's my universe. I got to play with it as I see fit. This is the beauty of being an author. Reese asks, do I have a limit for signing books at events? After seeing me go through what amounts to 30 books, and it's not even all of them, no, I don't. If you're coming to my Portland or my Pendleton event upcoming, please come, especially to the Portland one if you're in the area, because that little bookstore just stepped in at the last minute, and I'm so happy to them. You can see the events on the events page of my website if you don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to be in Portland and Pendleton at the end of the month. Yes, I am. That's when I'm going to be there. I don't have a limit. The reason I don't have a limit is if I hadn't written this many books, and I wasn't willing to sign them, then why did I write so many? Right? It's all my own damn fault. But the other reason I don't have a limit is I don't get everywhere very often. I mean, I know it seems like I'm traveling all of the time. It feels that way to me, but I know that I don't visit you and your city constantly, with a few notable exceptions. Therefore, you know, I might not be back again for another 10 years. And, you know, how many books can I write in 10 years, right? So I better send them all while I'm there. That's my feeling. If there's a really long line, sometimes they will either ask you to wait if you have, which has happened to me, a suitcase of books for me to sign. They might ask you to wait until the end if you're willing to do so. And in other cases, they'll have you, I will sign like the 3 most important ones, and then you can wait if you want the rest of them signed. That's what I've done at like Worldcons and things like that. So I personally don't have a limit. I know what my limit is in terms of how many things I can sign in a row without my hand cramping up. And so far, I haven't hit that one. And generally speaking, the bookstores are willing to stay open a little later just to handle the crowd. And if they aren't, I will go outside to the curb and keep signing books until all of your books are signed. Like I said, you show up for me, and I will show up for you as much as I absolutely can, and that includes signing all of your books for you. So, yeah. Robin asks, how long waiting for the sequel to The Fifth Gender? I don't know. I don't give timelines. Sorry, Robin. There is one in the works. I know exactly. So there is another book for this series. These are mysteries, so it will be another mystery on the space station for Triss and Dre. Triss and Dre, of course, will be the one investigating it, and Triss will be getting involved in causing trouble. But I'm not sure that they will necessarily be the main romance arc. If there is a romance arc, it might just be a mystery. I don't know. I haven't decided. But I have decided who dies and why and what's the reason. And it's very fun. I'm very excited about it. Well, this year I am writing The Drathy Dilemma, and then I will be doing some nonfiction probably, because my life is combusting again, and nonfiction is what I can write when I have to deal with a lot of other emotional stuff. So, so probably some nonfiction. And then I need to write a Parasolvers book. I just need to. It's been a long time since I visited that world, and I need to. I want to write the next Klon courtship book. So then it'll be a Parasolvers book. So that's kind of taking us into next year. And then, I don't know, then we'll see. We'll see what I'm feeling, what I'm inspired by. But the 2 things on the docket after that are the second book in this one and the second book in this one. And my personal inclination is slightly to write the second book of this first, just because the second book will close this one out. And I do like a finished duology. But if I'm feeling very like silly and ridiculous, then it might be the second book in the series. So it looks like it'll probably be something I'll be writing the middle to end of next year, which means it will come out the year after that if I write it. But that's as committed as I'm gonna get. My like I keep alluding to, my family life is just kind of chaos right now. I have aging parents, and I'm the only person who can look after them, and so it's just a lot. And it just kind of keeps derailing my writing, and I'm one of those writers who needs to put aside time or get away from it all or not be like emotionally stressed. It's really hard for me to write if I'm dealing with, if my brain is buzzing with a lot of different responsibilities. So yeah, it's a rough time around these parts, which makes me even more leery than ever about making any commitments to you about when things are going to get finished or done. Jesse wants to know if there's a Gail Con. Wouldn't that be fun? I would love to do a Gail Con. I just don't want to organize it. But yes, come see me when I'm in your area, and we will have mini Gail Cons. For those of you not in the know, whenever I'm at a convention like a Comic-Con or a Worldcon or World Fantasy or anything like that, the coffee clutches. Always try to come to my coffee clutches because they're basically like mini Gail Cons. And also at Comic-Cons, I often try to organize just a little random gathering. Or bookstores. Bookstores are kind of like Gail Cons. People often dress up. I encourage you to dress up. I always dress up. So yeah, and my reader fans are particularly social for reader fans. Just hanging out and asking your neighbor who your favorite character is and chatting, and you will make new besties. It's great. It's one of the most fun and hilarious things for me is at Worldcon in particular, when I go up to like the signing lines or whatever, I can always identify my line, like always, every single time, because everybody's chatting and excited and happy and dressed beautifully, and it's a lot of fun. I was like, oh, that's my line. I know exactly where I'm supposed to go. Yeah, GailCon would be great. Katie asks, how many characters are amalgamations of your friends and family, and how many are reflections of me? Katie, what a question! I have no idea what time it is. Oh, we're over time. Oh, let me run through the history. I don't know, 50-50? All of them are something. I mean, some of them are whole cloth invented. Like Triss is a completely invented character. He's not like anybody I know or have ever met. So is Dre, quite for that matter. And neither of them are particularly like me. I mean, I think most main characters have some elements of myself in them. But, you know, different quadrants of my personality or whatever. But, yeah. Not all my characters are wholly informed by the outside world. I mean, one of the things about writing during COVID, for example, was how not influenced I was being by my friends and family because I wasn't seeing any of them. It's part of the reasons I struggled to write. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't know the percentage. I haven't calculated it out. TK asks, would I write another seasonal book? Oh, that's a good question. In terms of like, so this one is our winter season book. I don't know. It'd have to be a weird one. You know, like cabbage bowling season, which was a holiday down in Waimea in Hawaii. So there you go. How about cabbage bowling season? No more questions, please, because I'm just going to run through the last of them. Make sure. Charlotte asks, is Carter part of the Dome 6 universe? Yes, it is. This book is very much tied to this book. That's the reason they look a little similar. Do you need to read this one? No, you do not. Those who have read this one were very excited about this one. The main character of this book has the same background as the main character of this book. They both work the same job and come from the same quadrant of the universe. So that is the tie. So if you have read this book, you know a lot more about Fex's background. But I don't think it's as important as those who have read this book think it is. Does that make sense? In other words, you don't have to have done it, but it might be fun if you have. It's a little bit like having read the Alessandro short story before you read the Parasol Protectorate series, but this one's a whole book. However, if you read this series and find yourself wildly curious about what the Wheel is and what being a crud rat is all about, because Fex is from the Wheel and he was a crud rat, then you do have this book to read, but I don't think you have to have read it first. It's not a prequel per se. Oh shoot, I scrolled too fast. Doing it with my thumbnail, and my nails are really long right now. It's very sad. Somebody's weeping happy tears. Somebody's giving me a 5-minute running, which I've very much gone over. Apologies, everybody. Thank you for holding on through the bitter end. Well, it looks like I don't have any. Oh, there's one more question from Beth. Can you tell us what the nonfiction will be about? I adored Heroine's Journey. Oh, I recommend it regularly. Thank you so much. Where's Heroine's Journey? I wasn't intending to talk about that, but I did also write a nonfiction in amongst all of these fiction that we talked about. Here's this one. So the next nonfiction I'm writing is going to be way more of a business book, business side of being an author, and it's called Going Hybrid. And essentially it's going to be about, if you're a traditionally published author, switching gears to being an independently published author, and like how to give yourself the best systems and foundations in place to make that pretty seamless. It's pretty niche. It will have good advice, I think, for people who are mostly just independently published as well. But it's going to be specifically written, and this is just because authors at events like Worldcon keep sidling up to me at cocktail parties and being like, Gail, about this hybrid thing, about this indie publishing that you do, and I'm just like, there is so much to tell you about this and so much to unpack that I need to write a book about it. That's pretty much exactly why I wrote this one. So yeah, the same thing is happening again. So that's what it will be about, but it's taking some time, and I think it's actually going to have to be in 2 parts at this juncture because it's getting very long. But again, it's me. I'm a little OCD, so there will be like checklists and templates and all that sort of stuff. I kind of love writing nonfiction because it allows me to be very organized and plan things out. So I'm sort of skipping everything that doesn't have a question mark at the front. So if you asked a question and didn't have that, Katie asks, how are you so awesome? Ah, that shouldn't have a question mark at the front. I can't answer that question, but thank you, Katie, very much. I really appreciate it. Honestly, we'll get maudlin really briefly, but with all of this like family stuff that I've been dealing with, doing this live and talking to you guys and just getting away and talking about my words in my world, it's really great. It's really awesome to be able to do this. So thank you for coming and listening to me natter and asking your awesome questions. It really does mean the world to me, and it really does help me. It helps me to know you're there. I talk about often that the author life is very unidirectional. We're like quietly in our caves writing our words on the page and then putting it out into the void. And I'm just so lucky that I have you guys who show up and chat with me and remind me that there are people on the other sides of the words who read them and enjoy them. And I think I need that. I need that touch tone. I think because from the very beginning, I always did cons and I always did book tours and I always talked to you and I was always out in the world reacting and interacting with my readers. This is incredibly helpful for me to get the constant reminder that my readers are there. So thank you all for coming and showing up and giving me love and asking such great questions about the books. This has been a lovely chat, and we'll do this again next month. And yeah, always ready to answer your questions. If I missed your questions this time around, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. You can either reply to the cheer up if it's a very urgent question, and it will come directly to my inbox, or you can leave me a calling card via the website, or you can patiently wait till next month. But yeah, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube video, whatever it is. I'll try to check back and make sure I answer it. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of somebody else if you have the bandwidth, be good to yourselves. Yeah, spread what you can in terms of love and tea and tasty treats and nibbles and recommending books and reading books. And I will see you next month. Bye.